Hey everyone, it's Jen from UX Research and Strategy, and I'm here with Jake Rhodes, who is the president of UX Research and Strategy and also a UX researcher at Microsoft. And I know there's been a lot of chatter around like, what is AI? How does a UX researcher do it and use it? And is it going to take my job? Those kind of things. So, Jake has some experience using AI, and I thought let's have a conversation and share it with the UX research strat community, and that's what we're going to do today. So, welcome, Jake. Thanks for taking some time.
Well, thank you for having me.
You bet. Okay, so my question is I hear this term prompt engineering. What is it?
Yeah, it's a fun time to be in this business. ChatGPT came onto the scene right around a year ago. A little over a year ago, people started becoming aware of it. It had been around for a while, but it exploded. It went from being something that was niche to something that had 180 million users and 13 million monthly active users out of seemingly nowhere. And so to put this into perspective, I think Instagram took about 2.5 years to grow to that metric, and it took TikTok about 9 months to grow to that metric. And so this is a lot of growth for something in AI. And so it hit that metric in 2 months. And now there's a whole lot of interest in AI as a technology, and there's a lot of movement in the economy to start preparing for whatever this is going to become in this emerging AI technology horizon. So within the development of all of this has been this introduction of prompt engineering. And the way to think about prompt engineering, it's an interaction layer between the humans and the generative AI. So it's the human side of the content of the chat. It's what you say, what you ask of it to get it to perform whatever task you're trying to get it to do. And so, AI isn't really that new, but prompt engineering as a skill kind of is. And like a lot of these large language models or LLMs, ChatGPT has been in the works for several years. What's really new about it though is how powerful it's become in a short amount of time. It seems like with ChatGPT, it's almost like having a natural conversation with a person, but the ability for it to do things, to reason, is unlike anything that we've seen before. So, now LLMs like ChatGPT, they can be creative, they can write entire stories, they can create images and music out of basic text prompts without very much prompting, actually. And they can also like reason, like I was saying before. They can break down problems into smaller things that can be reasoned out and thought through. So, for people who are in the technology space in last year and in this year, this is going to be the time when AI was really introduced as a product, not just as a new technology horizon, but also with the tools that use it. So, if you think about it from a designer and a researcher point of view, it's creating this entire market where you might be asked to participate in designing a product that uses AI, but you're also very likely to be working with tools that use AI themselves. And so it's going to become something that is, sort of almost pervasive in everything that we work with. So what is prompt engineering? To get to the root of your question. So what do they mean when they talk about prompt engineering? To answer that, you have to talk briefly about how LLMs work. And so what I'm going to do, I'm not going to go into too much detail with it, but we're going to play a quick game of guess the next line. I'm going to share my desktop with you. We're going to do this quick experiment.
Oh gosh, I'm getting quizzed already. Here we go. All right, guess the next word.
All right. So I'm going to start showing you elements of a phrase, and let me know when you can guess the next word,
Okay.
starting now.
I I am. I think that I think therefore I am. Oh,
This is a
no.
famous saying by Rene Descartes. And what you just did is essentially what ChatGPT, Anthropic, and most LLMs do. They use really large, complex mathematical models to essentially predict the next word in a sequence of words based off of user input. And that's one of the things that really kind of makes this whole business kind of bananas because with this very simple example, it is in essence what, like I said, what LLMs do, but it's, I think, still mysterious to people what makes it so powerful. What makes it powerful is that they have this huge reference set of information, the entire internet as of 2019, and what you're essentially doing is you're asking the model to make similar predictions to like what we just did, but with a much larger consideration set. And it's also benefiting from quite a bit of training and other helper functions that operate behind the scenes. But essentially, that's what it's doing. It's just predicting your next word. So think of prompt engineering as the skill of writing inputs that can harness all the knowledge available in the LLMs to generate a useful result like the one we were showing before, but on a much larger order of magnitude. There's a lot that I left out about what LLMs do. They have, like I said, a lot of other additional technology. But when you write a prompt, you're assembling components of like a recipe, the instructions, the context of the task that you're making it to, or you're asking it to do, examples that you're providing it, patterns you're asking it to match, and then you're giving it output instructions. And then the LLM uses that to generate a useful result. So let's talk about like, UX and UXR prompt engineering for a second. So, you mentioned before, there are a lot of issues in the press right now about the concerns and worries about AI, especially with LLMs like ChatGPT that are freely available to the public, concerns about job loss and AI going rogue and creating its own sort of dystopian technology. And some of those concerns, some of those concerns I think we all share, but those aren't the topics we're talking about today. I think that would make a great topic for another chat sometime. But what we should talk about them from the perspective of the like the what's useful about them, how they can be used from a UX perspective. We should be talking about them from different ways of applying them as part of our craft and part of our practice, just from a position of being prepared. And so I think if the question is should prompt engineering be something that you are familiar with and that you know about? I think the answer is yes. I think for three basic reasons. One, it's soon going to be table stakes for UXRs, for UX researchers. I mean, essentially, the main reason it's going to be part of your job. If you work in UX design or research, you're essentially a technologist. And to understand how LLMs and prompt engineering work in 2022 or 23 is the equivalent, or not understanding how prompt engineering works today is the equivalent of not understanding how a web page works in 1997, or not understanding how a mobile app works in 2015. It's one of the challenges of working in technologies. You kind of have to stay on top of these tectonic shifts, and this is definitely one of them. I'm not saying that you have to be an AI utopian about it, or that it's something that you should. But in order for you to have like a deep understanding or an opinion about it, you need to have some grounded experience with using it, and that's where
Let me ask,
having a yeah. Go
oh,
ahead.
tell me a little bit more about, like, for somebody who is a UX researcher, what should we know? What kind of level or depth should we know about this technology to feel comfortable or to contribute to conversations?
In terms of how they're constructed, I think it's important to understand, that, like what I was demonstrating before, how it's using its corpus of or its body of knowledge to construct responses, understanding also some of the issues with how it was trained. There's a lot of press that's been out there for quite a few years around how AI has certain entrenched biases and things in them having to do with the way that they were trained. Not that these were done intentionally, but that they were just a part of building the system. So understanding how they were built at a deep enough level to be able to understand where some of those risks are, I think is important. When it comes to prompt engineering, I think I think it's important to have experience and practice using it in very particular tasks that you're familiar with. And so if you're a project manager, for example, using it to plan out projects or to break down work the same way that you would do as a project manager. If you're a UX researcher, using it to explore potential methodologies like jobs to be done methodology, understanding customer problems, with the way the LLM looks at them, it can help you generate hypotheses. Understanding kind of the limits of how to interpret LLM responses is like another thing I think it's important. It's a hypothesis grade data. It still has to be validated. Those are the things I think that will be important, especially if you're contributing to product discussions, because there's going to be, I believe, a lot of enthusiasm and interest in using LLMs for product work, which is great. But having that healthy sort of skepticism of what's being provided by an LLM, I think will keep you from making some predictable errors in reasoning and some predictable errors in product discovery.
Cool. Thanks.
The final point I want to make here about just kind of these reasons around learning LLM or learning about how to use LLMs is that we often talk about these things as being kind of emergent, like, okay, AI is emergent. It's kind of coming out from being this experimental technology to something that's more practical. I would argue last year was the year it actually emerged. It's come into being as an embedded capability in the tools that we use. Every week you hear about another UX research tool that is being released now with AI. Either, like notably comes out with synthesis and repo building tools. Hey Marvin is another tool to help you summarize transcripts and generate insights from transcripts. And there's a host of other ones. And my point is that they're already being rolled out. They're all already being produced. The likelihood of you as a researcher encountering them as either a tool to be used in your organization or as a product that you're going to be contributing to is only going to go up. It's not something that's coming. It's something that's kind of here. The I guess the second thing I'll mention, and I'll actually show another slide on this one, is the other reason I think it's important for UX researchers to think seriously about learning prompt engineering is that it's actually an accessible skill that most people can learn quickly. I've got here a couple of examples of places that I recommend people get started if they haven't already learned prompt engineering. The one on the left, this is DAR AI. This is a website that has probably one of the best set of worked examples of different methods of prompt engineering. It's basically from zero knowledge. You go from building your first prompts to doing some really complex chain of thought prompts and things like that. A lot of the examples that I use, I draw from their curriculum. It's I think a great resource. On the right, I've got the best practices from the OpenAI's API website. Does a really good job of explaining some of the best practices to work with things like ChatGPT, which is where I think a lot of people will get started. And so the point I want to make here is that this is a new skill, but it's one that's actually built around natural language. And so from most practitioners' standpoint, I think for most practitioners, it will be a straightforward matter of just learning some of the basics and getting practice under their belt. It's not a very difficult skill to learn. You just need practice. And I think the best practice is one that is relevant to the work that you do every day, because you have the judgment, familiarity to be able to iterate quickly and make better prompts. The last reason I'll mention is that the more you understand about prompt engineering, I think it will set you up to be there in an informed position if there ever is a situation when product using AI starts to go bad. There's some real concerns about using LLMs in product design, and that I think UX researchers and UX designers are in a good position to help us avoid. So if you read the history of this technology, you'll see that, as I mentioned before, there are these cases of bias being built into them. And there are blind spots built into their training. There are going to be blind spots in using it for product making. And so I can't think of a better role to have, both experienced with prompt engineering, experienced with AI. I can't think of a better role than the UX researcher to be a voice in the room with during these product discussions to help make sure that the right outcomes, the right customer outcomes, the right social outcomes are in the air, that are on the table during these discussions.
Hence, going back to the value of learning these tools, learning enough to know
Right.
when to say, yes, this is a good choice to use this, or no, this is not the best opportunity to use this because ABCD.
Exactly. And I think that what's going to happen, we're still in the early days. There are going to be experiences that start to make it into the press, times where it works well, times where it's not working well, or when the other things come up. We've been the voice for accessibility. We should be the voice of the human side of AI, of interaction with AI as well. If you think about, I think you've been in this business long enough to know there was a time where, people, designers and researchers were less involved with, website information architecture. And those start to surface as usability issues, they start to surface as accessibility issues, and then we become involved later, and then that becomes a bit of a design challenge. Things get better if you involve design and research up front, and I think the same will be true with AI. In order to do that, you kind of have to have some grounded experience in working with it. Um,
Yeah, that makes sense.
then the last thing I'll mention on this learning piece is there's actually quite a bit of material online right now. If you go to Medium and just search AI and UX, ChatGPT and UX, you're going to see tons of work being published on other researchers' prompts. So this is researchers who have gone through some of the same learning cycles that we're talking about. They've developed some tricks, they've learned some things, and they've learned some limitations and some boundary conditions with using LLMs. I think these are great resources. I've learned a ton from reading of those experiences. And I would recommend other folks do the same thing. It's also starting to create a bit of a community of AI aided UX within online, and I think that from a growth and from a community building perspective, there's a lot of good that can be had by learning from people who've tried these things, especially when it comes to applying methodologies and using prompt engineering for reasoning. That seems to be where a lot of researchers are starting to lean into LLMs as aids to reasoning,
Can you
aside from
talk
just
Sorry, can you
go.
talk a little bit more about reasoning? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so let's take an example like four forces analysis or jobs to be done. Those are methodologies that we often talk about in very summary terms, like, okay, what is the main job? What are the sub jobs? Well, when you really start doing the research and the analysis that goes into doing a jobs to be done, a project where you're trying to understand jobs to be done, there's actually quite a bit of reasoning that goes into that. Understanding, what is a desired outcome, explaining that to an LLM or using an LLM to help you explore what different desired outcomes are, causes you to really reason through how you apply that method. Um, and one of the things that you see people experimenting with is taking LLMs to break down these, I think, what we would call, essential methodologies like jobs to be done, breaking them down into smaller and smaller pieces. And they're using LLMs to help them basically do some of that analysis. They're breaking the problems down, understanding what you would need to learn and what you might build into a discussion guide, for example, to understand what desired outcomes are. Those all ladder up to understanding what jobs really matter. And that's where things get super interesting, because on the one hand, it exposes how you think about it, how you reason about it. On the other hand, it exposes other ways of reasoning and thinking about it. And that's where they can actually add value just in helping you think, sort of having almost like having a thought partner in the LLM. Not that they're doing the work, but they're almost like having another person in the room to bounce ideas off of.
Okay. Thanks.
One of the things that you asked about, like, okay, like why would we want to learn prompt engineering? Those are some of the reasons. But one of the things I think that you hear a lot for those who try is, well, I've worked with prompt engineering a little bit, but I get stuck. I have these issues that keep coming up. The most common issue is I have very general or generic results. And part of this, kind of comes down to how you write prompts. And we don't have enough time to really do a prompt engineering deep dive. But what I'm going to do here is just show you a couple of examples of, if you were to say, okay, how might we write better prompts? Or how might I, just dabble a little bit and make improvements on my prompts enough to keep me going down my own learning journey. This would be the place where I would start, is just say, start with a basic prompt example or basic prompt recipe. Because what you'll find when you do a lot of these trainings and when you learn from some of these other researchers who have gone down this path is that the LLM expects to be given kind of a structured approach to any kind of prompt. And what I'm giving you here is an example of that. It's expecting, a set of instructions on what to generate, context on the problem so it knows what concepts to think about as part of its response, It's sometimes looking for input data, like if you wanted to give it a transcript or a set of customer statements and get them to summarize it, that kind of input data. Other times it's going to be looking for information around patterns to match. So sometimes you can use LLMs to classify things. All of that kind of falls into this prompt element recipe that I'm showing here in this example. And you can use this as almost like a template to help you think through your prompt engineering. And so when I talk to folks in the trainings that we've done and some of the workshops that we've done, I usually start here when we start getting questions about, okay, the prompts are, or the responses I'm getting are very generic and they're not very helpful. The first thing is you're making sure that you're actually giving a good structured prompt to the LLM that gives it a basic set of instructions, some context on the problem that you're trying to solve, examples if you have them, but also being specific on the output that you want. Usually, though, the thing that kind of comes up the most is context. And those are the things that tend to be the areas where you can make the prompts better is by adding more context. The more you can pack into it, the more effective the outcome. And the thing is, this is kind of counter to what we've been trained in a way from search engines. The analogy is always kind of coming back to search engines. But the I guess the way to think about it, I'm just going to kind of build this slide, is with a search result, you're thinking of a right query and you get an output result, and that's just kind of the end of the story. With, unless you just run the query again, but with prompt engineering, you're going to be iterating. A lot of times you're going to start with one prompt that builds off of a set of ideas or concepts, and then you're going to iterate. You're going to add more context to it. You're going to rerun the prompts. You're going to be doing things to get the LLM to zero in on what the outcome that you're going for. And so if some of the concerns, if you're experimenting with LLMs today, are that you're not getting very much, you're getting very generic results, you're not getting very specific results. There are some things that you can do starting with context. The more you can pack into it, the better. And what a lot of people don't realize is it actually builds over turns. So if you were in ChatGPT and you ask it a question and it gives you generic results, you can ask it in that same session. You can provide more context and it will improve the outcome through continued inquiry. So don't think of it as a single sort of a single shot thing. Single shot is actually a very specific term in this area. I don't mean it that way, but it's not like a search engine. It's something that you can iterate with through multiple turns. So what are the things that you should think about if your results are really generic? The things that I think I would recommend first is, if they're really generic, remembering that the results are not deterministic. They will vary over time. If you were to rerun the same prompt, you might get different results, and that result set may actually inform you of ways that you can improve the prompt. So just rerunning the prompt can help improve the results. You can do other things like changing the wording. You can ask for alternative ways of describing concepts to the AI, and this idea of asking the AI to help you improve the prompt to it is mind-blowing to some people. But it's one of the things that I frequently do with the prompts that I create is at the very end, I will ask the LLM, how could I have improved this prompt? And you would be surprised what it will tell you back. It will say, here are the things that you did well. Here are the things that could have improved the outcome. And then you can ask the LLM, please rewrite my own prompt with this advice, and it will do it. That's another thing that is kind of mind-blowing, is just how, because it's natural language, just how quickly you can improve on a prompt with the aid of the LLM itself.
What I find really interesting as a qualitative researcher who conducts interviews and tends to go broad and not leading questions and giving options, right? When we're conducting interviews, it's kind of the opposite. This is, you do need to be specific, you do
Yes.
need to be guiding and leading. And so it's a complete shift in mindset in how we're trained and how we conduct interviews with people. You do need to have that specificity in order to get value out of those returns. Is that a fair statement?
I think that, yes, I think that the more there, well, sorry, there's a threshold. I think that one of the problems that people run into is that they're not specific enough. when what you want is desired outcomes, but you describe it just as jobs to be done, and then you kind of struggle to get the desired outcomes. Then there comes a point when you may be too specific, and then the LLM may not be able to give you what you want. That's why I think iteration is important. But starting, I think, with understanding what types of context matter more. For example, like if you're asking what are the jobs to be done for a JavaScript developer, that's a little broad. You might want to be something, you might want to add, a little bit more context to, okay, what kind of developer are they? Are they working in, front end, back end? Are they working in a small enterprise? Are they working in a small company or a larger enterprise? Are they experienced in other languages? Though adding that kind of context, which is actually something that we often have in the back of our minds or actually have part of some of our assumptions but may not be explicit about, can help you get better results from an LLM. I think being very explicit about your goal. What are you trying to produce? What are you trying to look for? A specific set of job steps, for example? Or are you looking for just the problems that customers encounter when trying to achieve a job to be done? I keep going back to jobs to be done because I think it's been the content that's been most published about, and people will be able to find examples through Medium and other online sources. But
Yeah, and quick little plug there, UX research strategy, having Jim Callback talking about jobs to be done and using our AI to inform that theory. So that when this is recorded, this is upcoming, but if you're watching this later,
yeah,
it may be in the past, but we will be having an event specifically on jobs to be done and using AI for that. So I'm really excited about that event.
Me too. I've seen an example. I've seen him talk before, and he does a really good job of making those things I'm talking about conceptually very practical for some of the examples he talks about. He's of course written the Jobs to Be Done playbook, and he's I think really good at expressing that in ways that I think a lot of people can get their hooks into when they see him talk. I think they're going to love that presentation. One last couple of points I want to make about context. So this section here, I'm talking about ways of iterating, things that you can add to your prompts to make them more effective. What type of customers are you talking about? What is your goal? Being specific about the list of things that you want it to generate or what it is that you want it to help you do. But also, you can talk about more about the customer's context. These are all things that I think I said before. We have as part of our assumptions because the LLMs are so efficient in being able to provide responses. You can write a prompt with those assumptions, or you can write a prompt without those assumptions, and then you can compare the outputs of the two. And it's very easy. It's one of the things about it that I think makes it so compelling, is it's kind of low cost once you become familiar with prompt engineering. But I think really importantly, especially for researchers, you could talk about the methodology that you're using. You can, because like especially things like jobs to be done, switcher methodologies, journey map building, all these things have been published extensively online. And so we know that they're built into the corpus of the LLMs. And what you will find is that the LLMs perform better if they actually had a lot of content to use as part of their analysis. So don't shy away from including specific information about the methodology. Like sometimes I'll even put explicitly in my prompt, use the jobs to be done framework as expressed by Tony Olwick. Maybe like be that specific because there are two different major takes on jobs to be done.
Yep.
We're being very specific in the take that we're making on ours. And
Great.
so those are some pointers. I've got some other ones I can put together in a slide that we can have if there's broad interest in the group in doing maybe a session on kind of go deep on prompt engineering. I actually do a similar workshop at work for people who are learning this. I'm developing one right now for an organization of librarians who are repurposing this for some of the work that they're doing. So it's got general applicability, and if there's interest in this, Jen, we should do an event around it.
Cool. Yeah. Let us know after you watch this video if you have some interest in a future UX research strat event around this, and we can make that happen for sure. Great.
Yeah.
So, Jake, I have just one more question for you, and that is there anything else that we haven't talked about today that you would like to share?
So, we've talked about just that the horizon that we're in right now and the place we are as practitioners, and prompt engineering is something that is that I've talked about mostly, and just in terms of like things that you can get from it, from an exploration standpoint. There are other things that you can do with it that we haven't talked about, and it's just because we just don't have enough time. The things that I would encourage people to try once they become more familiar with prompt engineering is use it for some basic some of the basic skills that the LMs were built to do: summarizing, classifying, helping from a productivity standpoint. It may not be something that you want to rely on day to day, but become familiar with the ways that you can use it to summarize transcripts, to classify and tag things. Those are all things that LLMs were kind of built to do. They were built to classify, they were built to summarize. I think what you'll find is it's actually a fun and informative it's a fun, informative activity. You're gonna find that you learn things about yourself. You're gonna find that you learn things about the technology, and it will help make it, I think, a little bit easier to learn. But the big message here is to get out there and experiment, get some ground experience working with it, so that way you're in a position to start to form an opinion about it, and you can be on the lookout for things that might come up in work that are going to make your products better. That would be my parting thought.
Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. I've learned a lot. Again, this is Jake Rhodes from UX Research and Strategy and Microsoft. And if you're interested in learning more about this, let us know. We can make that happen. All right. Have a good day, everyone.